Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Literature and Robes with your host Jared. We're going to do another rapid fire review today. We've got 6 books, and the idea behind Rapid Robes is to get as many quick book reviews in as possible.
I don't think you have any idea how fast I'm really...
Let's just get started. The first book on my list today is Guards by Terry Pratchett. I've had this book for a long time. I don't know why I've been hesitant about reading this. Terry Pratchett has worked on other books. I think it was called The Good Omen with Neil Gaiman. And some of those books that Terry Pratchett writes are funny. You know, you can tell that he's going for sort of a satirical presentation or a parody of sorts. Comedy writing for the most part, but it wraps itself around a fantasy world. There's like 42 or 47 of these books in the series of the Discworld series, which is the infamous series where there's basically a disc-shaped world that's traveling on the back of a turtle with elephants on it and everything like that. This book doesn't really delve into that, but in every book it does mention that that's what the world is all about. So it's kind of a creative way to build a world so that once you get into a story about what goes on in that world, things sort of line up and make sense in their absurdity factor. So sometimes when you read comedy, the jokes just are either too much or they don't quite hit right. Sometimes they're a distraction, or sometimes they interfere with the story altogether, the plot and everything. Terry Pratchett has a way with exploiting and making sort of a mockery of politics and bureaucracy.
I wish to make it complete.
And you can kind of see that how everything is settled in. Now, this isn't the first book in the series. It's actually somewhere down the first third of the books that are in this Discworld series. And a lot of folks say this is a great entry point into it. And I can see why. Because you're brought into this world where there's a night watch, but they're kind of an ineffectual night watch. They're very odd.
You silly sod!
One of my favorite characters in the story is a person named Carrot, the confused human who thinks he's a dwarf because of where he grew up. That story in its own right is very interesting, but it offers an angle to a lot of the other stuff that's going on in these books. No chapters. I don't know if you can see, but all of the Discworld books are just one book. It was paced very well. There are like little page breaks and things like that.
I need a break!
They have like a Night Watch series. All the Discworld books have like wizards or financiers, guards, death. Feels like there's so much to get into, and this was just a perfect little entry point. I enjoyed it so much. It was so funny. It was heartwarming. I felt a lot for these characters. This one was just, it was a grabber. It convinced me that I want to read the next book, Men at Arms, but it also drops in some of the other characters from the other storylines throughout the Discworld canon. I would definitely start here. I've heard Mort is a good place to start. Maybe Going Postal. That's a shorter 3-book series within the greater catalog of books. I enjoyed it so much, but I gave this book a 4.8 out of 5 robes. Just the character work, the mismatched people, the jokes, the folks that weren't quite all there, haven't got all the bits and pieces up in their head. Terry Pratchett is very effective, almost like in a Monty Python sort of way.
End of that, really, just how we know the Earth to be banana shaped.
4.8 out of 5 robes for Guards. I will be reading more Discworld, rest assured, but I have so much more to read. Which brings us to the second book.
Let's go!
The Maleficent Seven, written by Cameron Johnston. I believe this is somewhat of an independently published book. Look at that cover. That cover just pulled me right in. I was like, oh my gosh, this looks cool. It falls under the grimdark fantasy category where everyone is morally gray, and sometimes you can find yourself rooting for very bad characters. However, they're more like anti-heroes. When you put all those characters together, they have many reasons to not trust one another. They have many reasons to want to harm each other, but inevitably, bad characters are always looking out for themselves.
I pray to myself, for myself.
My reading experience with this book was really enjoyable in the first moments of it. The gathering of the crew, so to speak, was entertaining to me to see how these characters were about as bad as you could make them. To get them all together, it was quite a trick to either appeal to their worst nature or appeal to their need for vengeance or revenge.
For my revenge, I will kiss you all.
And this book does have a good ending. I thought there was a good little twist in there. It wasn't terribly obvious where it was going. There were moments where this book did kind of slow down in the middle, but the action picked up again in the end. It felt like reading a comic book in a sense. Another thing that appealed to me was that when I bought this, it was a signed and numbered copy. So there's 100 of these out there, signed by Mr. Cameron Johnston himself. And don't get confused, there's a Maleficent 7 and then there's a Malevolent 7 out there by a different person. Malevolent 8, I think they just came out with too. Totally different books, totally different people. I gave the Maleficent 7 a 3.7 out of 5 robes. It did keep me reading. I wanted to find out how it would end because it caught me, the characters in the beginning. I wanted to see how all this stuff would work out. Some of the plot was a little bit okay. I might have been looking for something a little bit more that I just didn't quite get in this. If you're just getting into grimdark fantasy, this would be a great entry point as well. It read fun. It wasn't overly gruesome, but it did have some gross parts in it.
So much blood spurting.
On to the next. Now this one, I'm going to have a hard time keeping this one short. This is a classic written in 1959. I started reading this book because it was just sitting on my shelf calling to me, you know. Now, a canticle is a song, religious connotation, I believe. Liebowitz is an important theme, an important idea. There's this legend, this like religious pandering towards this Liebowitz, and we are brought into a post-apocalyptic world where scholars are the keepers of the past, but nobody understands this past because it is so far removed from where present day is. There's been sort of an apocalyptic ending to a world that used to be. Everything that was lost, and where this story begins is so far in the future that the past almost seems like a myth.
Legendary, if you ask me.
There's these artifacts from the past that are being discovered. Some of these artifacts explain some things, and some of these artifacts actually create more questions. There's a total disconnect from technology. However, there is this yearning sense to learn from the past to make the future better. If you could picture yourself living in a world where you know that your past used to be like a haven for people, like life was easy. Look around how life is today. If something happened to this lifestyle and humans were forced to go backwards in a sort of anthropological reversal of sorts. So you have all these unverified legends and sources and materials. This book just blew my mind.
Mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. Like...
And it wasn't that it was action-packed or anything like that, but it was heavy and rich in themes of what's the responsible thing to do, what happened in the past that we should avoid doing in the future. Is it easy to learn from a history when that history is so full of holes? People continue to survive, and it appears that religion is kind of the thing that has glued society together in the future. There were times where it was humorous, times it was very serious. There were also just so many big questions that I just found myself grappling with, or experiences that I was trying to empathize with, and it was very well told in the story. This book was written right after World War II. Science and technology were taking leaps and bounds. Inevitably, you know, humans don't know when to stop the thing. They get greedy, they become narcissistic, less empathetic,
Paranoid.
and it's really a commentary on a lot of that in its own indirect way. It was very wonderful. So it follows 3 different characters at 3 different points in the future. 3 totally different characters, so don't let that throw you off. But it is like a stepping stone. There's a jumping point from one section to the next to the third. Lots of Latin in the book. I'm not familiar with Latin, but it was fun trying to pronounce Nomine Domini Fiat Spiritus Sancti.
Shut your mouth.
Walter M. Miller was an extraordinary author. I don't believe he's with us anymore, but he has certainly left his mark upon the world. And surprise y'all, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 robes for that very fact. This book was just mind-blowing to me. It took me out of my world, put me somewhere else. Some people could complain, it's older, the writing style isn't contemporary. Well, I beg to differ. I think that Walter M. Miller Jr. put a lot of thought into this. I think a lot of people were afraid of a nuclear accident or a nuclear war.
We've seen war. We don't want war.
I don't think it's for everybody. It's kind of a heady book, but at the same time, the ideas in it aren't beyond what people could get. On to the next. The Canticle. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The next one here, Dan Brown. It's been a few years since he's put out a Robert Langdon book, but this is The Secret of Secrets. I'm a fan of his. I've read The Da Vinci Code and Fire and Demons and Origin and Inferno and all those other ones. I enjoyed the Robert Langdon books because I always end up learning something from it. All of the stuff that he puts in his books are factually based. The people that are mentioned, the organizations they work for are all real. This was a lot bigger than it looks. This is like a 700 and some odd page book. I almost want to say it felt like one of the last ones because of the way it wrapped up in the end. But, you know, Dan Brown is really good about kind of exploring something that's on the edge of science. He really tries to get at where the physical and metaphysical meet. I don't think it's really a spoiler to say he talks about consciousness in this one.
I can't feel my bingo.
I think he does some interesting, fun stuff in this book. Some of the ideas in here, some of the explanations, the metaphors, kind of grapple with that. Now, whether it's real or provable, I don't know, but there's probably some research out there that is trying to possibly entertain this idea. But yeah, it is set up much like a Robert Langdon book, the symbologist who finds all kinds of meaning in very small, minimal things that you wouldn't think have meaning in them. And it was action-packed. Usually Dan Brown's Robert Langdon books are fast-paced page turners. This one had some yep, down, yep, down, yep, oh God. Right here, I got myself another signed copy. Now, I mean, that's the legend of Dan Brown right there. That man is a very, very famous man for his books. Dirty little Dan Brown. He's getting up there in a few years, too. I mean, I'm right behind you, bro. Right behind you.
You're getting too old for this shit.
So Dan Brown, The Secret of Secrets, I gave this one a 4.6 out of 5 robes. It was a good read. I think that some of the other Langdon books were a little bit better, moved a lot faster, but he uses a lot of the same formulas that he does with the other books. He does them exceptionally.
You can't fix what ain't broke.
If you enjoy those books, this book is for you. Next, and this is a new one. This one just came out February, I want to say. Matt Dinniman has been one of the hottest authors in the market due to his Dungeon Crawler Carl series.
So hot right now.
There's an 8th book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series that's coming out. He has 7 right now. And this seems like a one-off. It is just a novel. This book reminded me a lot of Dennis E. Taylor's Bobiverse. The first one, We Are Legion, in some ways. It reminded me of Dungeon Crawler Carl. I think this is another version of LitRPG, which is something that authors, they tell a story with gaming rules, like role-playing game RPG rules. There's inklings of like tower defense games and role-playing games. Humanity has expanded out into the stars. They have found planets that are inhabitable. There's this little community that's just kind of doing their thing, and then out of nowhere, there's apparently some other invasive entity that is trying to disrupt this community. Without saying too much, because that would give away some of the fun, I'm just going to leave it there, but it was funny, like satire, very off the cuff with his humor. Some of it's irreverent. I felt like his character work in this wasn't quite as strong as the Dungeon Crawler Carl. He made some really good characters out of Carl and Miss Donut, so pretty hard to make something that's better than what is already pretty amazing. Yeah, I thought this was a fun read. It was a little different. I think it would be an enjoyable thing for most people if they didn't want to have any sort of major commitment. It wasn't too bad at all. And I just love that name, Operation Bounce House. Fun moniker. And it's Rhythm Mafia rules. And there's a little bit of a signature. That's Matt Dinniman's signature. Wow. Wow. After all was said and done, I gave this Operation Bounce House a 4.3 out of 5 robes. I think it had a great idea behind it. It didn't feel terribly original to me, but the way that Matt Dinniman pulled it off was fantastic. There was a little bit of heartstring stuff that you felt in there. Kind of a crazy, chaotic world. It was a fun little no commitment read. A one-off story. There's no big series, and it's Matt Dinniman's newest novel. And finally, Ken Follett. He is one of my favorite authors for all things historical fiction. If you aren't familiar with Ken Follett, I suggest going and reading The Pillars of the Earth. Ken Follett has a way of finding himself a little pocket of history, and he'll do a lot of research on that time period. That research is like how things were done, how was society set up, who was in power, who didn't have power, did those that didn't have power have a voice, or did they have agency in the communities they lived in? And I don't think Ken Follett's gone much further back than, say, 11 or 1000 AD. This one goes way back to about 1500 BC, where British life was not necessarily British at all. There was no religion, there was nothing. There were pastoral and agricultural anthropological societies that were living in the southern part of England. The Stonehenge monument is beautiful. The focus of the story is there's this monument, but there's people that live outside of it. Ken Follett paints this picture through a 10 or 15 year period of how life was and how this monument was essential to their life. What we have discovered about Stonehenge is it is a calendar that responds to the sun, the cycles of the sun from season to season. The monument tells the people, like, when mating season, when it's time to harvest, for certain celebrations, to pay homage to their gods that they believed in. This was, again, before organized religion was really a thing. You also learned about potential concerns for people living in that time period. The characters did not need to be complex because there was not much complexity. There was no philosophy. I mean, if there was, it was to find out a practical way of doing things or a practical way of thinking about things. But there wasn't much written down, going through rote traditions until somebody came along and thought of something better to make whatever they were doing a little easier. So there are technological advances in this book like there are in all of his Kingsbridge novels, but there's also the human advancements were recognized as well. Ken Follett really put a lot of thought into that. That's what his books are excellent at, because he leaves that modern mindset away. He tries to handle problems in that time period with that type of a mind, whose ingenuity was going to save the tribe. And if they couldn't be thoughtful, if they couldn't be smart about their situation, they might all have perished.
Mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead.
It's just a very complete book, guys. And when you read historical fiction, it provides a story within the story. So it's a little more enjoyable to learn about the past than it would be, saying, just reading a straight history book. So, Ken Follett, what should I give your most recent book? I don't know, Jared. What would you like to give my book? I worked really hard on it. It's almost 700 pages. Well, I'm going to give you a 4.8 out of 5 because you're pretty flawless there, Mr. Follett. Part of what I think what gave me the 4.8 is, I don't know, pacing was kind of slow. When I say that it's probably here and there in like little salted in areas throughout the book. I recommend Ken Follett for anything. There's a trilogy about the two world wars and moving into Vietnam in like the 60s and 70s. Like I said, the Kingsbridge novels. He also has a lot of one-offs. He has a book called Never, but he does deep dive into whatever topic he's trying to discuss, historical importance of that topic. But that is it, guys. That's all 6 today. What do you think? Have you read any of these books? Guards, The Maleficent 8, The Secret of Secrets, The Canticle of Liebowitz, my God, Operation Bounce House, and Circle of Days? Please leave a comment.
Please clap.
Tell me what your thoughts are, guys. I'm very curious. I usually try to get back to you as soon as I can, and I'm always up for a thoughtful back and forth once in a while. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, bling, or whatever you feel like doing. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you swinging in. And remember, keep reading. But I gave the Maleficent, and I'm 11. When you start reading this book, Canticle tightrope act. I think that Walter M. Miller post a lot of that were did Canticle